In this video, we'll look at some common user interface mistakes and what you can do to resolve them. As you'll recall from the tips on designing a good user interface video, that there are some guiding UI design principles that you can use to keep yourself in check as you're working on the user interface. You want to be consistent, you want to be direct, give the user good feedback, allow forgiveness, in other words, let the user out of any particular tasks that they have begun. Be simple, allow the user to be in control, and keep the visual integrity intact. Now let's look at some 12 common bloopers and how you can resolve them, given that we want to stay within these guiding design principles. You'll find a lot more bloopers and resolutions to these bloopers in the GUI bloopers and web bloopers books, both by Jeff Johnson. The first blooper to talk about that is very common is confusing messages. Let's take a look at these two here. First, we have one that is providing an OK button and providing some text, a system call that should never fail has failed. So again, giving the user not a lot of hope or options as they work with that one. Here's a confirm of a cancel. This can be very confusing because the user isn't exactly sure what to do. Do they want to cancel the stock order, or do they want to cancel of the stock order, etc.? Here's another one that's telling the user that all their data is going to be lost, and they have one option, simply to accept that that's what's going to happen. And of course, any sort of strange messaging that the user receives can make them feel very frustrated. You can resolve this by first programming all your messages. Grab all your messages that you use within the program and have them written in one place, such as constants that can be easily changed in one location. And also have them reviewed by a tech writer or someone on your staff that is good with the verbiage and can look for consistency and clarity. You also want to make sure and check all of your dialog box choices to make sure you're not trapping the user. You're not giving them some choices that no matter what they do, they're in a predicament. Here's a second common blooper, and this is with context-sensitive menus. You'll see on the left-hand side here that this edit menu has some options when the user is composing an email message. Now, when the user is editing a message, this edit menu changes to include some different commands. Now, this seems like a good idea because it's reusing this menu space, but it's actually very confusing and very hard for users to learn because it's hard to recall where those commands are located. A better way to do it is to enable and disable commands in the same menu. So notice when the user is composing an email message, the add, delete, and delete all are all disabled, grayed out, but their position stays the same. And when the user is editing a message, the find, replace, and check spelling are disabled. Now the menus are consistent, the user can easily recall where to go and can easily see what options are available no matter what task they are performing at that time. Now blooper number 3 is poor label placement. Now perhaps looking at these three examples, you can immediately see which one is the most pleasing to the eye. And if you guessed the one in the middle, you would be correct. You can see that everything is lined up and there is sufficient space between the label and the field, but not too much space where it's hard to tell where the label is pointing to or what it's identifying. And or something is not lined up. You can see that this date box below with its label is below the other, and that can be very disjointed and uncomfortable for users to look at and work with. The fourth blooper is having an exclusive toolbar and no top menu or any other way to trigger these actions to occur. So in this particular example, this window has only a toolbar and has all of the commands within the toolbar. This violates the user's expectations about where to find commands and the availability of commands. It doesn't allow for you to group in a hierarchy those options as you would in a top menu. The user has no way to see any keyboard equivalents. Some users just prefer menus. And the advantage of using a toolbar is that it's easy access to the most frequently used commands. So when all of the toolbar options are representing everything just in a toolbar, that ability to use a toolbar for the most frequent commands is diluted. So the solution is to include a toolbar and a top menu or a menu bar. So here we have both. The primary window should always include a top menu with all the commands so that the user has one place to find everything that's available to them. The most frequently used commands should be in the toolbar, and it's good to allow the user to customize the toolbar where possible and where it's helpful to them. Blooper number 5 is what we call the TTY GUI. In other words, taking the old prompt-based user interface and just directly transferring it to a graphical user interface. The new graphical user interface doesn't take advantage of any new widgets or provide any helpful initial values. So although it's now displaying in a window with a couple of buttons, there is nothing about it that helps the user now that they're within a graphical user environment. So to resolve that, remember specifically that when you're moving from a text application to a graphical application, in a text mode application, the program was the primarily responsible for the flow of the program. Now it's the user that's responsible for controlling their own actions and interactions with the program. So here now the screen has been changed to include helpful widgets, some helpful default or initial values that are helpful in allowing them to possibly skip some of the data entry. So again, at the heart of this is keeping the user in mind, the user's needs in mind. Blooper number 6 is poor window location, and really what this means is just simply allowing the program to place the windows as it's going to place them and not taking into consideration where or how you'd like those windows to be placed. So things to think about with window location and window placement is that you actually spend some time deciding where each window should go, whether it's relative to the window that is opening it or specific to the mouse, or however you want to specify where the window should go. You'll note in Genero that there are window styles that help you also to control whether the user can minimize or maximize a window, and all of those areas about windows should really be touched on and looked at to make sure that the program runs in the most efficient and easiest to use manner. You probably want to position your windows based on type. For example, an error, warning, or confirmation you might want to bring right to the user's attention and placing it right to where the user's mouse is pointed or right in the center of the screen. And make sure that you're placing windows entirely on the screen, that they're not somehow cut off, and that they're not covering up something important that's on a screen or a window maybe behind it. So don't display all the windows on top of each other, and don't cover up important information, especially information in a previous window that the user needs in order to fill out the information in the new window. Blooper number 8 is poor or no initial value. Oftentimes when we move to a graphical user interface, we are charmed by some of these widgets that seem very easy and wonderful to use, and they are. However, when we show a combo box with no initial value, we're forcing the user to select something when they might be able to skip that part of it and use the default. Similarly, when we use radio buttons, not having one of them selected doesn't guide the user along in terms of making a change or not, and being able to skip that particular part of the form that they need to fill out or are using. So some good solutions, for example, with radio buttons, is to go ahead and use a default or an initial value. This one here, the second one here, is using a checkbox to enable it entirely, so it's grayed out until the user wants to select it. And the last one here includes a fourth option of none, and that is selected as the default. Now, how do you determine what the initial values should be? Well, it's recommended that you use, number one, common sense, number two, business logic, or look at the experience and the application data on how many users select which option. So by popular use, you can help to define your initial value, and also on user data. Blooper number 9 is demanding more data than needed, and it's important to resolve this by remembering the 3 layers of form design. And the most important one here is the relationship. So everyone has experienced working with a program or working on a web-based form where you as the user are required to enter information that doesn't seem applicable or doesn't seem that it should be required. So again, you want to help the user through the form process by supplying as much information as possible, but also remember that the relationship with the form, the relationship layer for the form design is very important. So you're building trust with them, you're asking for the appropriate information from their perspective, you're saving them time where possible, and they are getting the sense that they will benefit from the time spent filling in the form, whether they're a data entry clerk and they're speeding up the time that they can do their job, or they're a new customer who's filling out a registration card for you or your company. You want to be cognizant of that relationship. And again, the other 2 were conversation and appearance. But in terms of this blooper where programs demand more data than is needed, or force a requirement on a particular field that it doesn't feel should be required, that can kill that first layer, the relationship layer. Blooper number 10 is intolerant data fields. Here's an example in a Mileage Plus program where the user is entering their Mileage Plus number exactly as it appears on their card. Now, this particular field doesn't accept spaces, but on their card, there are spaces included. So they get an error that the Mileage Plus number or the email address you've entered is invalid. Well, I'm confused here because I feel that should know whether that was a Mileage Plus number or an email address that I entered. But also, my Mileage Plus number includes spaces on my card, so not including the spaces would be confusing. A way to resolve this kind of a intolerant data field would be allowing for input formats that are recognizable to the user. So you might change the field so that they're actually filling in 3 different fields, one for the first 4 characters, the second 3 characters, and the final 4 characters, etc. Or go ahead and reformat the data, accept it as it is, and go ahead and get rid of the spaces, returning back to them into the field the correct format. But again, intolerant data fields can be very frustrating and are a very common blooper and very, very easy to resolve. Another very easy blooper to resolve is the blooper of menus being too long. Now, whether it's a combo box list or a top menu options from the top of the screen, we tend to see big, long menus that are just too long. You can resolve this by avoiding it at all costs. So change your design so that you don't have to have such long menus. If they don't fit on the screen, at your lowest common denominator of your screen size, that's a good indication that there's too long. There are situations like with a list of US states that a long menu is the only presentation that makes sense. It's become the de facto standard for that kind of a list. In that case, it's fine to include it, but at least put it in a particular way that allows the user to scroll quickly to the option that they want. So putting it in alphabetical order can be helpful. It also can be helpful when working with, say, a state list to know what the default might be. So, for example, there is a California government website that when the user fills out their information, the state field doesn't even default to California. It defaults to Alabama. And of course, that'd be a very easy thing to fix and would solve many Californians some frustrations. The last blooper, and blooper 12, is inconsistent terminology. We see this time and time again, and it's also something very simple to resolve. Carolyn Jarrett, in her work that's on her website, formsthatwork.com, reminds you to remember that same name, same thing, different name, different thing. It can be helpful to construct a table that are showing the terms used in an application for each concept user to see. So what you can do is create a list, and it can be very eye-opening to see all the various places that the terms are used and what they're used for. A typical reaction from programmers might be, so what, I have more important things to do. But what can happen is someone looking at the bigger picture might be able to say, now we see why the program is hard to use, or why our users are having such a hard time learning it. And that can be simply because of the terminology being inconsistent throughout. So there's two different ways for terminology to be inconsistent, and what you should be looking for are areas where different terms are used for the same concept, and the other option or other variation, the same term is used for different concepts. So again, if you can go through your applications, or have someone go through your applications, just listing out where and how you use a term and for what concept, you can very easily rectify those inconsistencies and make your program much easier to use. In summary, we've looked at 12 common bloopers and how to resolve them. There are many more helpful examples in Jeff Johnson's books, GUI Bloopers 2.0 and Web Bloopers. His website, GUIBloopers.com, also includes helpful handouts such as this checklist, which allows you to validate your own software applications and be sure that you're ridding them of any common user interface mistakes.